Good morning, relatives. Good day to all of you. Today is August 26th, year 2017 from the calendar of Pope Gregory. And as you can see too now, this day is also our day, known to be the day of Chignawi Thoshri. It means 9 rabbit. The year we're speaking of it, Shiwi in our language of the Nawatlaka, is known as the year Makwili Kali Shiwi. It means year 5 house. We have cycles of years, cycles of the bundlings of time that also coincide with the moon counts at the same time. So we wanted to bring this notice forward today because of many things that are happening simultaneously, and just to try to catch up a little bit. For example, the 22nd of September, what is known as the equinox in the calendars of the Western calendar tradition, as I said, of the Pope, the Gregorian calendar, a modification of the Julian calendar, a modification of the Roman calendar. All of these are systems of sequences that have to do with the counting of the cycles of the passage of the sun. They call it a year. We call it a shiwi. But on September the 22nd of this year, there is to be in the fall equinox once again the regeneration of the International Spiritual Monument at Standing Rock. And we intend to be present there again on the promontory overlooking the Cannonball River, overlooking the Missouri River, and with the drill site in full view across the way. Now in operation, with even they say there's petroleum products traveling through the pipeline. They say that, but we always still know that there is no permit. There's a piece of paper that was generated illegally in violation of due process, in violation of the environmental justice statutes, in violation of the peace of the treaty agreements that are in place between the Ocheta Sakuan nations and the other also corresponding indigenous nations of the territory that are the guardians of the Missouri River watershed, the Big Muddy. The permit is not in place though. There's a piece of paper, but it's not a legal permit. The permit was fast-tracked by the president defect. I don't call him president-elect. He's the president defect. Donald Trump sitting in the chair of the White House in Washington, D.C. at the moment, creating all kinds of disturbance, creating all kinds of turbulence at the psychic level, the cultural, and the political level. But one thing is absolutely clear. He is following directly along the same straight line path that brought General George Armstrong Custer into the Black Hills in the first place. They're after the gold, they're after the profits, they're after the money, they're after the capitalization that comes as a result of the commodification of the natural resources and labor of Mother Earth. And we who stand in their way, the indigenous nations, the original nations, we are in the path of, they call it the German language, the Blitzkrieg. They use the Blitzkrieg technique in Germany when they rushed across the borderline between Germany and France, across Poland. They obliterated Poland for how many times long? Poland was not on the map. It didn't exist as a country. They tried to absorb that nation of original people of the European peninsula. Europe is not a continent. It's a peninsula of Eurasia. So the Blitzkrieg technique they instituted here beginning 1845. They were supposed to stay on the eastern side of the Mississippi River. That was the understanding that the British put in place with the French, with the Spanish. That was the understanding that was in place, but the Anglo-Americans, they kicked their mom in the butt. They wouldn't listen to the mom. They said, to hell with you, mom. The revolution ensued, and as a result, we have 13 colonies that established themselves as a country, but they are colonies. They were and they are still colonizers. But now they're not just strictly outright, straight up colonizers with charters from the Crown of England. They kept the crown, but they turned themselves into states, and then they call themselves a country. They call themselves the United States of America, a nation. It's a confederation of corporations established under charters of states that have been constituted under the principles of white supremacy, beginning on October the 12th, 1492, and extrapolated in 1823 with the Marshall Decision, the Marshall Trilogy, the Johnson versus McIntosh case, and then taken forward that same year continentally in 1823 with the Doctrine of Monroe, which is nothing more but an extrapolation of the Doctrine of Discovery. They kicked the crown out, they kicked the royal families out of the continent, and established themselves, Uncle Sam, as the head of the plantation, the big boss, the plantation owner. But now it's the corporations that are in the seat of power, and they have placed the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, into that chair of the presidency so that they control the contracts that are to be signed among themselves to legitimize, to provide the legitimization of the outright genocide, of the outright colonization and theft of the natural resources and labor of the indigenous nations of the continent, the great turtle island of Ayala. So yesterday in Arizona, the dust-up was dusted up again. This man, the commander-in-chief, who illegally, immorally, unethically authorized the permit of the Dakota Access Pipeline. That's not a permit. It's a piece of paper that was produced illegitimately, illegally, and is still being challenged. The permit is not valid. The pipeline is not valid. It's not an operation that can be condoned with any sense of legality, morality, and must still be challenged. But how is this tied together with what happened yesterday when Donald Trump pardoned the ex-sheriff of Maricopa County, Joseph Arpaio? It's all tied together. Arpaio at one time was in Honduras. We know why they assassinated Berta Cáceres, for the defender of water, the water defender, Berta Cáceres, the Rio Gualcarque. They assassinated her. Berta Cáceres was assassinated for being a water defender. And Joe Arpaio was also in Honduras training the paramilitary forces in Honduras to lay the groundwork. What happened when the U.S. government authorized it. They were complicit in the assassination. They were complicit in the coup that took place when they took out the president and installed the paramilitary regime that's still in place today in Honduras, with the outright genocide, persecution, and violence that is happening on a daily basis in that country, directed against the indigenous peoples, the environmental justice advocates and defenders of that country. But coming back to Arpaio, he was there in Honduras as part of the training forces, and yesterday he was pardoned by the president-in-chief, Mr. Trump, even though he had been convicted, guilty of violating the federal court order. A criminal given a presidential pardon yesterday. To what end? Well, righteously, everybody is focused on that issue. It should be. We should also be very cognizant that that's a side skirmish. That's not the front line. That's not the battle that we are actually engaged with at the present time as original nations and the colonizer settler states. Why do I say this? Yesterday also, 2 days ago, the announcement was made. Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada, all that bullshit. They're signing a chapter. They're writing a chapter in our history. They're going to write a chapter in our history, and they're going to call it the indigenous chapter of the North American Free Trade Agreement being negotiated right now. Huh? What do you think of that, relatives? They're writing your history as a chapter in their book, the book of the Doctrine of Discovery. The book that the Doctrine of Discovery, Canada uses that, the Johnson versus McIntosh decision, to proclaim to the world that they have right of concession to give title to the Dakota Access Pipeline folks, to the tar sands operation. They have no title. They have a claim. The only claim they have is among themselves. The Doctrine of Discovery does not apply the indigenous responsibility as the land caretakers, the people who belong to the land with that responsibility, can never be shared with the colonizers. Why? Because the Creator gave it to the indigenous nations as a responsibility. The responsibility can be shared, but it cannot be allocated. It cannot be prescribed. It cannot be subscribed to a colonizer state who is going to be operating to the detriment of the Creator's mandate of life and the well-being of life. That's a violation of the treaty that we have with the Creator to be the guardians of life in our territories. The North American Free Trade Agreement, oh Canada, but what's happening in Mexico? In Mexico, the same thing is happening. They are lining up, relatives. Mexico, Canada, the U.S. Right now, they're sitting in Washington, D.C., renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, what is that? It's the same thing. It's a paradigm of genocide, colonization, being described as a trade agreement, but all it is genocide. All it is colonization. They can't call it colonization any longer since the United Nations proclaimed colonization illegal in 1960 with United Nations Resolution 1514. They can't call it colonization. So what are they calling it? They're calling it development. They're calling it the United Nations Sustainable Development 2030. It's the same system. They just changed the clothes of the empire. The empire is naked. The empire is naked. It has no clothes. It has vestments. It has the vestments of the Doctrine of Discovery, and it has the investments of the North American Free Trade Agreement extended continentally under the Monroe Doctrine, 1823. Why do you think Venezuela? No? Venezuela just adopted in a constituency assembly a recognition of the right of self-determination for the indigenous peoples of that territory with full right of equality and self-determination. Now, Arpaio was pardoned by Donald Trump, and this is, just like in Dakota country, a treaty violation, because we're supposed to be at peace. The U.S. government has a song, they sing it, from the halls of Montezuma. Why do they say that? That red line that you wear on those black pants of the U.S. Marine Corps. You put that red line on there after coming back from Mexico because you killed our people. That red line symbolizes the blood of Mexicans that you put on your body, and then you formalized that on your uniform, and you made it into a song when you invaded Mexico to attempt to sustain the imperial project of manifest destiny, built upon the evil, nefarious roots of the Doctrine of Discovery of 1492, October the 12th. So today, when the world is focusing on the attention, and righteously, of the Arpaio pardon, that's a righteous issue. It's a righteous fight that must be fought. But that's a skirmish on the side of the fight where the front line is actually being distracted, the attention away. Once again, why? Helsinki. Who knows Helsinki? Who knows anybody in Helsinki? Who knows what the hell is going on in Helsinki? Who knows what they're doing in Helsinki? They will be doing it in Helsinki. The Russian government has already establish markers underneath the ice of the polar cap. Markers for claims of property rights. For when the full-fledged global warming unleashes the catastrophe of the destruction of the polar Arctic cap, in Helsinki they're negotiating what will be the doctrine of discovery now written into the times of the supranational corporations. They're not just the corporations transnational. They're supranational. They're beyond any national regimes. They even have their own currencies. They have their international drawing right. It's a currency with no ties to any constituency. It's built for them only. It's a financial system in the highest levels of commodification and capitalization that is being instituted right now in full view of the whole world, but at the same time it's being disguised as development. The Development Plan 2030, the United Nations calls it. And that is why the system-wide action plan is in place. To get the check off on free, prior, and informed consent by the so-called representative bodies of indigenous peoples that are bringing into the fold of the garbage pan of the system-wide action plan of the United Nations to provide the mechanism of consent manufactured to the purpose of these colonization designs. So today, relatives, we say to you, we remind you once again, keep fighting as you're doing. Keep your heads up. Keep your hearts high. Keep your wits about you. And don't be distracted by the side skirmishes that they're trying to pull us into. They did the same thing at the Greasy Grass. They did the same thing at Wounded Knee. They did the same thing all along. But we know where they're coming from, and we know that it's a sickness. We know that it's a disease. We know that it's a social pathology that has been infected within the European American culture, in particular as the pathogen, as the agent of contagion. And its root is the ultimate racism of white supremacy instituted through the doctrine of discovery, the doctrine of manifest destiny, and now being officialized and updated. It's being officialized and updated in the package known as the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So prepare yourselves. September the 22nd, the call is out again, once again. It's always there. It's just a matter of being able to hear it and listen to it and move and act accordingly. On the 22nd of September, once again, emanated from the International Spiritual Monument, Standing Rock, Altepe, Izcaloteca, Aviala, Samanawak, from Mexico to Canada. The stand is to be made. The understanding will be brought forward once again that as the original nations of indigenous peoples of the territory, from Mexico to Canada, we deny consent. And without our free, prior, and informed consent, there can be no valid renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. In 1994, when NAFTA was instituted, there was not yet the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in place. It is now. Therefore, when the commander-in-chief proclaims that NAFTA should be modernized, okay, that means peoples, as indigenous peoples, equal to all of the peoples. This is the modernization of the concept that has to take place and will take place and is taking place. And on September the 22nd, at the timing of sequence of the fall equinox, once again, that reality will be brought forward in full force throughout the great Turtle Island, Semanawak, Abiayala, Tupac, Huevecoyo, Izcaloteca, Ayo.